Cool.
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. How's it going? How's Florida?
It's going good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the audience, I'm out at St. Pete's Beach right now in Florida with my fam. So that's why I'm wearing sunglasses and it's abnormally bright here right now. That's why I'm also recording on Sunday because I'll be leaving back home tomorrow. So
Yeah. How was Legoland, by the way?
it's Legoland. It's crazy, but with COVID and everything, park restrictions are starting to lift things. I guess if you're fully vaccinated, then you can kind of do it whatever you want, except you have to still wear a mask on all the rides, which I thought was kind of interesting. So
Interesting.
anyway, yeah, so it's pandemonium, but yeah, and you had a fun weekend as well, it sounds like.
I did, yeah. For those who don't know, it was the National Climbing Nationals this weekend in Salt Lake City. So basically,
So
Olympic
the World Cup.
Yeah, the World Cup. So yeah, that's right. So that was really fun. It's actually 2 blocks away from my apartment, so I just walked over there and attended.
That's awesome. Yeah, it would have been fun to watch. I'm envious.
Next weekend, they're doing 2 rounds back to back just because of COVID and everything else the way I understand it. So
yeah, exactly. Cool. And I think this week we want to talk about actually we're talking about a talk, so this is a bit meta, and we're going to be talking about metadata. So anyway, fun cheesy lead in, but we had a nice talk at the Utah Data Engineering Meetup where Raghu Murthy from Data Coral, he talked about metadata-first architecture. So I think both of us walked away from the talk feeling like we both learned a lot, and I think the talk resonated quite deeply with us. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my reaction had a lot to do with orchestration. So I've been, heavily involved in projects around orchestration for several years now, typically using Airflow. And so before we dig into it, I'll give you kind of my current take on the state of orchestration. Airflow, in some sense, replaced Apache Uzi in the open source ecosystem. So Uzi was like heavily skewed towards Hadoop, whereas Airflow's paradigm was like, hey, do everything in Python, do everything with APIs. We assume you're just going to talk to other systems and control them. At the same time, for all of its benefits, Airflow has some drawbacks just because, like many architectures, there were some decisions made in the architecture when they were designing the system that have kind of come back to haunt us and caused a lot of pain. And so there are other frameworks, but they're kind of 2 big competitors for Airflow that have come out to address these limitations. And so one is Prefect, and then more recently we've seen Dagster come out. And these frameworks have done more to address data cataloging, lineage, metadata, those kinds of questions. And that's where we can maybe start touching on this talk this week.
Yeah, so the talk had to do with again, metadata-first architecture. And so I think the central notion is there needs to be a metadata layer across the data pipeline that keeps basically all systems can reference. So I think it was like the tooling layer, the metadata layer, the DevOps layer, I think the 3 layers that Raghu talked about. And we'll post the link to the article and the video in the show notes here.
Yeah.
Sorry, gagging people walking down
here. It's okay.
It's Florida. So yeah, I think this is it's an interesting notion, and it's one that we've kept hearing about.
You can pause. I can cut. I'll just cut this part if you want to do it that way.
Yeah. So but it's a notion that we've been talking about separately too. Just sort of this idea of like a central metadata store is necessary for all these systems to really start working together in some sort of harmony. Because right now there's an explosion of tools, whether you're talking third-party SaaS tools, managed services, open source tools, and there's not really like a common layer for all these tools to talk to each other. So it's very disjointed right now. So more data tools in the data ecosystem is a great thing. It's also a horrible thing.
Right.
So,
yeah, interop is the key problem right now. And when you use Airflow, the data engineer writing Airflow DAGs, are forced to handle all the metadata yourself, essentially. I mean, Airflow tracks like task metadata. It doesn't really have built-in primitives for data structures, data lineage, data catalog, and those kinds of questions. And the thing that really jumped out at me, which I didn't expect this coming into Raghu's talk, but basically was this idea of essentially automated orchestration where you can give your system the metadata and say, okay, here's a SQL query, therefore I'm building this table from these other 3 tables. And then the orchestrator can look at that and say, okay, I need, these are upstream, these are downstream. You tell it the frequency of updates you want, say once an hour, and then it builds out the orchestration for you. And it says, okay, I need to do X, Y, and Z first, and then I'm going to build my target table of customers based on that. And you can build these extremely complex orchestrations by basically providing the lineage metadata either through SQL queries or more directly.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
And hopefully this thing gets some traction, because something like this is needed right now, and it needs to be simplified too. Otherwise, basically, I think what we're kind of talking about in the talk when we were doing the Q&A was, kind of hinting at that there might need to be a sort of a standard, interface or something like that. So,
yeah, because that's the entire. There's so many tools in the ecosystem now. And data engineers' work these days is getting them to play nice together. And so if you can build a standard that everyone can talk to, it makes the interrupts so much easier going forward.
I mean, what do you think happens if you don't have a standard?
I think basically data engineers spend all their time building connectors between, they probably end up building their own metadata layer, and then they have to figure out how to store metadata for 50 different tools that they're using all at once. So it ends up becoming their main job now is just managing metadata if you don't have a standard.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of hits on what we've been writing about too.
Yeah.
And I think we'll post some blog posts, more videos on this, but it definitely seems the job of a data engineer has been changing over the last several years. I think, as you refer to maybe the primordial data engineer, the big data engineer, like that was very systems heavy. Data engineers are moving up a layer, I think up the value chain as a lot of these tools are becoming abstracted. But it doesn't mean the job's going to get any easier. Now it means you have to coordinate all these different tools together. And I would say in some ways it becomes more complicated. The good old days of running like a monolithic Spark stack, for example, I would say that might be easier by comparison. It's got its own trade-offs, but at least you could reason about the stack in its entirety.
Right.
Now, when you have it pulled together, 5-trans Snowflake, or Firebolt, or Lord knows what else comes on the pipe that we haven't talked about. There's hundreds of technologies. This becomes a very big problem. Interoperability, as you say, that's certain.
Yeah, data engineers are becoming principally cloud engineers. And by that, I mean, it's like managing all this orchestration and all these different APIs and all these different tools, typically in a cloud environment, which, it's nice to move up in abstraction. So they're not having to worry about updating HDFS, for example, updating their deployments of HDFS. But yeah, it's created a whole new set of problems. And I think we're just starting to see the tools roll out to deal with these problems, but it's still very nascent, right? I mean, Airflow is not all that old, and there's already talk that we'll see, we're going to be replacing it within a couple of years.
That's how it goes. I usually put about a two-year expiration date on any hype cycle that I see. I saw this with early, Hadoop tools. Saw it with Spark. That was supposed to be the saving grace. I think it's on its way out personally. You see it with basically any tool out there. Everything has an expiration date because best practices become better, right? So the most you can do is just try and keep up. But with tools, again, like, we recently partnered with a company called Upsolver. I mean, they solve a lot of the nightmare around managing a data lake. That was a complicated thing. Now it's as simple as like giving them your credit card, spinning up the data lake, doing your transformations in the data lake, and being in a merry way, right? That used to be Spark or some other tool. Now that layer of abstraction is there, and things are a lot simpler, and you're going to continue seeing greater simplicity. So it sort of reminds me of just the days of moving from like vinyl and 8-tracks to cassettes to CDs, but along the way you started seeing standards on musical formats too. So and
I think, what are the standards in the data space going to be? I don't know for sure. I think SQL is going to still be with us. I think there will be certainly other processing layers that are important. Maybe Spark will evolve to keep up with that challenge. Maybe it won't. That remains to be seen at this point. What else? So on the software side of things, on the software development, web development, REST is very, very standard. And that's been a standard for how long would you say now? It's pretty durable at this point. It doesn't look like REST/JSON is going anywhere anytime soon. And so we sort of need the same idea of a standard interface layer in the data world, so that as all these new tools keep coming out, we have better ways of gluing them together and making them talk to each other without having to start from scratch every time a new tool drops.
Yeah, absolutely. And so not sure where it goes. Hopefully it goes somewhere. I think we'd love to, be a part of that discussion and help, drive it and see where it goes, because it needs to happen, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, we're at this interesting inflection point where the future's not been written yet. And so I think anyone who's interested in, in solving this problem is a really good opportunity to solve it. Because centralized metadata, if you think about it, this is sort of like one of the holy grails of making data work for real. If you don't have centralized metadata, you have systems that can't really talk to each other, right? And so, but you have this explosion on one hand, you have this explosion of tools being funded by VCs, and there's a lot of money just being thrown into data tools. On the other hand, again, as we talked about, none of these tools can really talk to each other in a coherent manner. Sure, if you're part of like ecosystem A, which is, what was the cool one? The DAG stack or something like that, or, it was like extra, I can't remember what it was, but the common sector is like Fivetran, right? Snowflake, Looker, like that's a stack we see a ton. If you're part of that ecosystem, I think that, you're there. But if you want to introduce new tooling into that's a cold start problem every single time. Say you want to introduce like a new library, or a library that's not, maybe, part of the approved list, so to speak. You're gonna have to write that yourself. So, or if you do, you have to implement a library, and still, that's every time you do that, it's a cold start problem rather than just like. Ideally, you should be able to plug in whatever tool, and it should just work, I would say, off the cuff. That would be cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's funny. I mean, in terms of metadata tools, the Hive Metastore is still super popular, and yet that's not at all new or bleeding edge in terms of how it handles metadata for tables and such. So we really, we need to head into the next generation metadata, and it's a huge opportunity. As much as data tools have matured and improved since 2000, there's just such a massive opportunity in front of tool makers right now.
It's a massive opportunity. It's going to require an industry consensus at some point, though, right? It's a massive opportunity, but think of how many open source projects there are out there. There's hundreds or if not thousands in the data space, and there's new ones every day. Think of how many people are starting data tool companies, right? Focus on whatever niche. We always talk about Matt Turk's, slide of the data landscape, that Lumascape, I think it's called, they call it. And it's intentionally so absurd in the number of technologies. It's hard to keep track, but interop, I think interop is going to be the name of the game. I think we talk about this a lot, on our own, but interop, I think, is going to be the big topic over the next few years, as well as stuff like just data management, data ops. These, I think, are going to be the central topics of data engineering, over the next, for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. So suppose that I have an awesome idea for a new data framework that's supposed to compete with Spark and BigQuery and Snowflake and everything else. Okay, so I've got some new paradigm of data processing, but I don't want to think about metadata. I don't want to reinvent metadata. What metadata standard would I code against? And that's still an open problem in some sense. The industry has yet to solve on that. Once we can figure out what that standard is, it makes tool development so much easier. And it also means that if I, as a data engineer, am already running an existing data stack, I can slot in this new tool and just have it talk to all my stuff that's already there without having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic when it happens.
Yeah.
So I think in some upcoming videos, maybe we'll touch on, different types of metadata, probably go a lot deeper into, that and probably some other old school stuff, right? Metadata. That's supposed to be like a cool topic. Now all of a sudden, a lot of people are talking about it. And, but it deserves a lot more attention, I think, than I have time for today. But but you expect to start seeing more of this. I mean, it fits with the general theme we've been seeing too, which is I think a lot of the unsexy stuff, data management, data quality, governance, all this stuff. This is what data engineers are going to be focused on. It's not just about the cool big data tools anymore. I think that those conversations, in my opinion, are passé. I'm over them personally. It's still important, but when you zoom out and understand like the problems that need to be solved in data engineering, whether or not you should choose like Spark or some other tool, I think is it's just pick what works and start focusing on I think more higher value issues in that.
Exactly. And in some sense, the point of a really great metadata standard is that data engineers won't have to think about it quite as much. It'll be sort of, the operating system of data almost, just like Linux is still a standard, even though the whole Unix stack is not new. Linux, everyone can assume Linux as a baseline for most software development, unless you're in the Windows ecosystem. We need something like that for data and metadata that can exist in a cloud environment as just sort of the bedrock foundation of everything else we do on top of it.
That's right. Cool. Well, for the audience out there, expect Matt and I to keep touching on, I think, related issues to this. As we're writing our book as well, I think we're finding that the themes that you're going to start seeing in data engineering, these aren't new themes. Actually, these are themes that have been around for a very long time.
Yeah,
it's just that up to now there hasn't been the bandwidth to really focus on them to the degree that they are actually important, but they're critical. But it's going to be changing, and we'll keep talking about it.
Yeah, and we'll probably loop back to. Oh, I was just going to say we're going to probably loop back to auto-orchestration as well, because that concept was so awesome. I'd love to sit down and talk about it at greater length. And I think that's going to become just a baseline requirement for future orchestration systems. Having seen it once, it's so exciting. And frankly, it would remove so much work in so many data engineering contexts that it's going to be very important in the future.
Well, I mean, you got me thinking just when you said auto-orchestration. It reminds me a lot of actually data science, back in the early 2010s, especially data science. I'll call it machine learning, but machine learning was mainly focused on building bespoke models. It was very much a cold start problem every single time, right? You fast forward to today, like training models, that's pretty much a solved problem, I would say. It obviously continues in certain aspects of AI engineering, but for very pedestrian problems, the discussion shouldn't be about what's the best algorithm to train this model. AutoML or some variant of that can solve most problems.
Yeah.
You should be focusing on, how do I productionize my models and get value out of it in the ops chain? Very similar things are going to be happening in data engineering, where I think setting up pipelines, setting up workflows like that right now is very much a bespoke problem, sort of like creating models was back in the day. But thankfully, there's a lot of bright minds that are turning their attention to operationalizing these workflows and putting together best of breed technologies and practices along that the data engineering life cycle. And it's exciting to see. But I think you just got me thinking. That's very similar to what's in the machine learning space way back in the day. And now making models is a special thing back then. Making a model today, I don't even consider that special anymore. Like your ability to productionize a model and retrain on a frequency that makes a lot of sense, capturing, being able to monitor your model for drift and retraining off things like that and debugging models. That's more interesting in my opinion, personally. If you're in training models, knock yourself out. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying personally I'm kind of over it. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the emergence of orchestration that's much easier to manage will allow data engineers to focus on higher value problems. Frankly, I've spent so much time just writing DAGs that manage a sequence of SQL transformations to deliver data to machine learning engineers. Like, well, if I can write the SQL but automate the orchestration and not have to write a bunch of low-level DAG code, like that's a huge improvement to my life.
Yeah, for sure. In DBT, and tools like this, I think they solve certain aspects of it, like the transformation layer, but really it needs to be taken a step further, right? Like if you're using SQL as your, as your declarative interface with your orchestration, that's a much different workflow than what DBT would be solving, right? So we're still early days, and this is still, again, like Raghu's talk. Thanks, Raghu, for the talk. But it's still very much like a first principles theoretical discussion. I mean, he's doing it at Data Coral, but for this to reach widespread adoption is hopefully it'll happen soon, but it's gonna require a lot of thought and a lot of effort. But I think we're sold on the idea. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably just see an explosion of adoption in this area. That's my guess. Like we saw the explosion of adoption of Hadoop. We've now seen the explosion of adoption of cloud data tools. And I think this might be the next big sea change in data engineering, just better management of metadata. Especially
when it's introduced by somebody like Raghu, who's
it's
kind of fundamental to the tools that we just talked about, right? I mean, Hive and other tools at Facebook. Right? I mean, this isn't just some dude off the street. I mean, he had a role in kind of shaping the modern data landscape. So
exactly.
He has an opinion in this area that's worth listening to.
Yeah.
So
completely agree.
Cool. I'm gonna get back to
do that. Jump back in the ocean.
Some praise, but but let's just continue the conversation for the audience out there. If you like this content, smash the like button, as they say. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as our podcast. It's available under the name the Monday Morning Data Chat. So you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Google Play, and wherever else you get your podcasts. So, cool, Matt. Looking forward to seeing you in person again. And until then, we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you soon, and enjoy the rest of your trip.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.